What's going on, everybody? Joe from NDB Aviation. It's been about a month since my last upload, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One, my flying's been pretty busy, and two, I went through my yearly recurrent and just finished that up earlier this week. So now I'm back to making some videos and doing other things. This video itself will cover PC components and laptops, and I'm going to try to tailor make this one as best I can for Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 X-Plane 11, your flight simulation needs if you're trying to build a desktop, upgrade your desktop, or buy a new laptop for flight simulation purposes. Now, am I going to go in depth on every CPU from high tier, mid tier, low tier, and the same for the GPUs? No, I'm going to try to give you some very basic, generalized information that will help you make a decision if you're out there right now trying to find a CPU that fits your budget and performance mindset, and a GPU that's already overblown in price because they're all being marked up right now due to supply and demand issues, and also briefly touch on certain CPUs and GPUs and why you might want some over the others. And it's going to come down to basically power efficiency and power scaling for gigahertz, your overall top speed, some basic overclocking discussion, very minor, and just which ones are the most popular and seem to be doing a very good job right now for what most of us are going to do, 1080p gaming or flight simulation. I know there are a lot of people out there that want to do 4K. However, I think if you already are planning to build a 4K rig, you know what you're going to buy. You're just waiting to get it. So maybe this will help you out. Maybe if you're watching this, you've already made up your mind of what you want, or maybe you've been like me over the last couple of years. You've been waiting for releases to come out, new CPUs and GPUs, and you're ready to pull the trigger, but you have about 3, maybe 5 different CPUs, maybe 3 different GPUs that you're trying to find right now. And if one of them pops somewhere, meaning they come available, you're going to buy it as soon as you can. In this video, I will not be covering the shortage of supply. That we all know there's a shortage of supply of anything technical or electronic out there. I'm just going to run over CPUs, GPUs, laptops, and a very short discussion on subjects like desktop cooling, so a closed loop water cooler like my old Corsair here. We're going to talk about, briefly, motherboards. This is a dead motherboard now, been for a couple years, and also NVMe drives and cases, because believe it or not, a case might be something you really want to think about before you buy it, because there's some really good looking ones out there, but they may not do a very good job of keeping your rig cool. So let's jump right in, and let's try to keep this one under about 10, maybe 15 minutes if I do a good job by staying on my outline. First off, CPUs. I, for the longest time, was an Intel fanboy. I've always liked Intel. Pretty much everything I've owned has been Intel CPU based, except for the recent upgrades I made to my old desktop. I'm now running a 5900X. There are many reasons behind that. Making videos, family photos, Microsoft Flight Sim 2020, X-Plane 11, and a few random games from here to there. But AMD offered the best bang for the buck and the best power efficiency. AMD has been doing a very good job of improving performance year-end and generation-end, and keeping the overall power needs pretty small with the latest upscales in the sensor shrinking and die for the nanometer size of the CPUs. Now, Apple currently is the king of that with their M1 chips, and the new M1 chips coming out soon than the M2s, because they have access to the first dies coming out of, TSMC. AMD second, then Intel's doing their own thing. IBM's doing some pretty cool stuff too, but we'll see when that finally hits for our markets. But when you're looking at overall performance, we're starting to see that the 5600X and 5800X do a really good job for Microsoft Flight Sim 2020. And compared to their Intel brethren, I'm going to throw up a screenshot from one of the Hardware Unboxed videos. This is from a recent video where they compared the 11700K, the 10700K, and the 5800X. If you look at this, they paired these up with, I think, a 6800 XT or 6900 XT. I can't remember exactly which video card or GPU they used with this, but if you go through, I'll put a link in the description down below. You can see that all 3 of these CPUs do a really good job of giving solid performance. However, there's an issue here to me. If you're trying to be budget, but you want a 6 to 8 core CPU here, you can go with the 11th gen 10700K and save some money and get relatively good performance. I'm sorry that the 4K was cut off on the bottom there. I was in a hurry to grab these screenshots, but you can find the link in the description below to watch this video in entirety to get an idea of what they're talking about here. But you can definitely save some money going with an older Intel chip. Another thing I want to throw up following that is a comparison of just the CPU mark comparison between the 11600K, the 5600X, 5800X, 10850K, because it's a previous generation model. I think overall it's not a bad CPU for the price point potentially if you can get it on a deep discount. And then the 11700K. All of these are great CPUs. They're going to do a good job for you. But when you look at the single thread, you see that basically Intel with the 11th gen is starting to catch up with AMD. But with further benchmark comparisons from maybe Hardware Unboxed, JZ2Sense, a bunch of other people out there that do a very good job deep diving into all of these CPUs, you're going to see that the AMD CPUs do a really good job on power consumption and overall multi-thread usability. So you can see the 5600X beats out the 11600K, and really overall the 5600X is right on par, given it's about 1,000 below and 3,000 below the new Intel, but price performance is not that bad overall when you look at these. Now, one thing to remember, every single one of these CPUs, and I think this is true for the K models, maybe it's the F models that don't have an iGPU, but especially for the Ryzen here, you're going to still need a GPU to run anything that's graphics based. So when you're out there trying to build your new rig, do make sure whatever CPU you're buying, whether or not it has an integrated GPU built into it. Now, what that means is it's going to do some basic rendering for you. You might be able to start X-Plane 11 and do a basic IFR flight, no visuals basically. But it would help you to start your desktop up and make sure that if you built it from scratch, it's going to work. Because having a dedicated video card these days is pretty important for anything visual. And with them being in such short supply, it's something that is going to be hard to come by unless you're going to buy one of the cheap ones from maybe Best Buy when they get them in stock, and those go for even $200. That's a lot of money you might be sinking down the hole. Next up, let's talk briefly about laptop CPUs. The efficiencies in the AMD chips transfers over to your laptops these days, and some of these new laptop CPUs are doing a great job. Even the newest Intel ones are doing a great job with power scaling this year, it looks like, early on, and it will be interesting to see as we get beefier laptops shipping with the new 11th gen 11800H series or 850H, what those really end up looking like. And I think price point wise, most people are going to be happy with the 11850 or 800H CPUs from Intel, and pretty much anything from Ryzen, the 5800HS and up, because those are going to be really good laptop CPUs that are not going to break the bank and take the laptop over $2,000. Because if you take a look at what I have here, I'm going to throw a chart up again. This is CPU mark comparison again. Pause this if you want to read into it a little bit more. But the 11900HK is a top-of-the-line Intel performer. However, in early benchmarks, we're seeing that it is not probably going to be worth the price that you're going to pay just to get that CPU. You know, it's not like it's drastically greater than the 5900HX, 5980HS, and even the 5800HS. They're pretty close. And the 11800 series is going to be really close at 11980HK. The only way we're going to see that one really stretch its legs is probably going to be in some kind of laptop that is large and has a lot of cooling built into it and some extra power to boot. So recapping the CPU side of things, if you're looking for a desktop CPU, what I would recommend right now are going to be either the 5600X, the 5800X, maybe a 10700K because of the price discount right now, because the motherboards are cheaper, especially with the 10th gen Intel CPUs. And if you must have 11th gen, I do like that 11600K for the price point. I think the 11700K is kind of pushing it though. I would probably go back to just buying an AMD chip at that point. In all honesty, if I had to go out there today and rebuild my system, I bought a 5900X, I would probably still go out and buy a 5900X over the 11700K. I know it's more expensive, but I would be happier with the 5900X overall. And if you're going to go for a laptop CPU, the ones that I just showed, if you scroll back, you can see those again. anything from AMD with the 5800 and up, or anything from Intel, I would say the 11800 series and up is going to be good. Stay away from that 11900 HK. I don't think it's going to be really worth the value or cost for performance, and it's probably not going to deliver that much more performance in the long run to justify that $2,000 plus price tag just to get into that territory. The only caveat to all of this CPU talk that is kind of outside my league, I'll admit, I'm talking outside my league on this one, but I've been studying this for the last 4 years because my desktop died 4 years ago, and then 3 years ago my laptop died. So I've been trying to find the perfect setup for all this time. Alder Lake is the next generation of CPUs coming from Intel. And Alder Lake is going to take this concept of, see if I have something that can demonstrate this, big cores, and this is going to be grossly underestimating how this is honestly going to work versus small cores. Forgive me for not having a better visual representation. So you have these big cores that are going to do a lot of work, and these little cores for efficiency purposes, and they're going to help each other out in certain circumstances. We don't know what this is really going to do. Right now they're saying that's a 20% IPC improvement, and in other platforms it could be 100%. I think that's marketing jargon at this point. I could be wrong. Again, I'm out of my league talking about CPUs and upcoming Intel chips. But if you are in the market, but you don't have to buy something right now, I would wait for Alder Lake. Alder Lake is coming later this year. I'm sure there'll be a lot more leaked information over the next several months because there's a new version of Windows coming for this new architecture as well. We're going to see a brand new Windows 11, Windows post-pandemic version. I don't know what they're going to call it. Maybe they'll call it Windows 12, 13, 14, 15. They've gone in very different number sakes before. You know, we've gone from Windows SE, Windows 98, Windows 7, Windows 10. They're all over the place. And hopefully I'm not breaking trademarks by talking about that. But Alder Lake is going to be very interesting. It could prove to be a great game changer for some programs. But again, Windows is working on programming for it. They've been doing that for a year with, I forget what the other Lake from Intel was, that has basically introduced this concept of big and little cores for getting Microsoft ready for it. But here's the thing. X-Plane, Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 may not take full usage of these big core, little core ideas for a while. This could be something where Windows may be able to just plug and play everything and it's going to run greatly and smoothly, and it could just be something that takes a while for the overall coding to catch up to the CPU capability, just like what we've seen for the last several years, last decade almost. We've been growing in core number, but we've also had games and coding that is catching up to the overall core number. And a lot of things have improved, but there are a lot of games and a lot of programs out there that are still not taking full advantage of my 5900X or even a 10700K. This is something that's going to take time to fully utilize, and I don't see Alder Lake, unless it's a great price point and offers really good performance, taking a big chunk out of AMD's market share, or maybe convincing me to switch to Alder Lake. The only thing that's going to give me the idea of maybe going to Alder Lake is going to be that PCIe 5.0 and DDR5. Those together could offer some serious improvements potentially. But keep in mind this. It'll be a new CPU, it'll be new RAM, it'll be a new motherboard, it'll be several other things that might end up having to be new to go with it. And knowing Intel and the board makers' processes of how much things cost when they're brand new, Alder Lake may not be worth the price if the supply chain issues are still here next year when Alder Lake finally hits at the end of this year, that it would be even affordable, worthwhile upgrading to Alder Lake. So keep all of that in mind through this discussion about whether or not to buy something now or wait, and hopefully this might help you with your CPU choice. Moving on now, let's talk about GPUs. GPUs are going to be your next big thing that are going to cost some money. Sorry, one of my lights unfortunately failed, so I'm going to turn one of them to get a little bit more light here so I don't just disappear into the darkness. NVIDIA and AMD remain the top players in the GPU market. Intel's coming up quickly, but let's break down some quick suggestions for the GPUs, because we're still dealing with price markups due to supply chain issues. And for a desktop, for the pricing issues going on right now, I still think of the RTX 3070 as a sweet spot. If you can get a hold of an AMD RX 6700 or 6800, I think those will do you really well, because a lot of the benchmarks I've seen show that those are great GPUs. I'm going to throw something up here on the screen in just a second, but I want to finish talking about a couple other things. Laptops, I think a 3060 or 3070 laptop is going to be your best bet. I see a lot of RTX 2000 series, so the 2060, 2070, 2080, still out there on the market, fetching high prices due to the supply chain issues out there. I don't think any of those are truly worth it unless you get a Max P version, and that is the maximum wattage that you can squeeze out of that GPU. Also, just new out of AMD, we have the AMD CPU GPU combos coming in laptops now with the AMD RX 6800M. Now, it fits perfectly between the 3070 and 3080, and a few times it kind of beats out that 3080. And Hardware Unboxed, Jarold's Tech, I don't know if JZ2 has anything about it yet, but Jarold's Tech is diving deep into this one, and I'll try to link a couple of those, or at least his channel, so you can go over there and watch his videos talking about laptops and this new technology from AMD that looks very promising, and it should be hitting shelves very soon. So with a laptop, 3060 or 3070 is the RTX ones that I would suggest, because those are coming in at a good price point still. And then the RX 6800M, there is one from ASUS. It's a Strix with I think a 5800 HS or a 5800 or 5900 with the 6800M, and it's coming in below $2,000 with performance that comes close to a 3080 and better most of the time than a 3070, which says a lot there, and it does a great job of power scaling and efficiency. So this could be a game changer for the laptop market. But talking about laptops, let's knock out a few things. GPU wattage. It's more important than ever, and there are a lot of companies that have been doing a better job of power scaling the GPUs, sharing between the CPU and the GPU. Lenovo has been doing a pretty good job with that. Unfortunately, they don't let you really set everything the way you want unless you basically go into the BIOS and you start overclocking one way or the other, or undervolting. And I don't really recommend overclocking in laptops. I think the undervolting issue is, well, I'm not going to get into that because I haven't done it enough to talk in depth about it. But GPU wattage is huge this year, because in previous years, if you've been looking at laptops for a couple years now, the GPU side has had Max Q, which are more thin and light laptops with GPUs like the 3060, 3070, 3080. But now this year, instead of having a Max Q moniker, they are just selling them with an RTX 3060, 3070, or 3080. They don't tell you directly what the wattage is. Now let's think about this. You have something that requires energy to produce frames per second to get you the best gaming experience. We want more wattage to get that better frame rate per second out of the GPU and the CPU. In a laptop, we share a lot of that energy, and a lot of laptops have a cap energy that they can use. So it means you're going to be sharing energy between your CPU and GPU to get the best performance. What AMD has done is they've done a much better job this time. Sorry, for some reason all my lights are dying on me tonight. AMD has done a better job of power scaling between the CPU and GPU. And what they've done is they've made a better power share and better power scaling that I think maybe next year, the next Vega chips are going to be even better. But with the NVIDIA chips in mind, look at the manufacturer's website. And what I'm going to do is throw up something from MSI. I am not sponsored by MSI whatsoever, but I feel like they do a good job disclosing this. So here is a screenshot from MSI's website. Here you see the RTX 3080, 3070, and 3060. They talk about up to 1740, 1720, 1802 megahertz, and then here we go. 130 watt, 140 watt, and 150 watt maximum graphics power with dynamic boost. May vary by scenario because, again, you're sharing this power, all this wattage with the CPU and the rest of the laptop. So you may not always hit those peak limits. But not every manufacturer is making this easy to find. So please take a look at the GPU wattage. Coming back down now, laptop cooling and power delivery has diminishing returns. So if you're going to buy that new Intel i9 11th Gen 11900HK, you might end up squeezing a lot more power into that and then taking power away from your GPU. So you're going to have to find that perfect balance of CPU power and GPU power to get the most out of that laptop. And aside from that, you're also going to have to think about heat. If you're looking at a laptop, look at something that's a little bit chunkier. Don't try to just get a thin and light like the GS66 or even a Razer blade, because while you might get really good performance for the most part out of those, you're paying a lot of money for something that is going to be limited overall in its potential because it is in a small chassis and therefore will not have all the cooling that you want to get the maximum performance out of those devices. In the past, Alienware has done a reasonable job. HP recently did a much better job revising their cooling and their overall power scaling within their units. So try not to go the thin and light unless you absolutely have to. Look at something mid-range. I like the MSI GE66, GE76. I like the new Omens that are coming out that are a little bit chunkier. They give a little bit of breathing space. Even some of the Alienwares look pretty good and do a good job of cooling. And there was one more. Some of the Clevo brands like Sager, Electronics, and a couple other companies do a good job of creating good performance at a lower price with a lot of air movement. But just keep in mind, the better air movement in a laptop, the louder it's going to get. Lenovo also made pretty good Legion laptops. Maybe this year we'll see those do another great job. And they are some of the better screens, at least to me when I've seen them in stores. I did like the HDR screens on the Lenovo laptops. However, I did try one out last year that ended up having to be returned because the HDR had an issue with the screen in Windows that I couldn't live with. It had a lot of problems. However, a lot of people did not have problems. It was just me personally. And that's pretty much it for the meat and potatoes of what I wanted to discuss. Again, this is just a discussion to give my 2 cents about what's going on out there and some very good suggestions about what you might want to get and consider before buying something out there. So that wraps up the main thing. Main CPUs, desktop, 5600X, 5800X, 10700K, 11600K, and maybe the 11700K. Laptop CPUs, AMD 5800, 5900 series, and up with maybe the Intel i7 11800H series. Looking down at the GPUs, desktop RTX 3070, RX 6700 or RX 6800 from AMD. Laptops 3060 or 3070, and that brand new AMD GPU coming out I think is really will be worth something because under 2K, that might be the best power performance that you can get. So those are my suggestions, and try not to get a thin and light laptop unless you absolutely have to. What I want to talk about next, and I kind of hinted at it earlier, closed loop water cooling. This is easy to install. This one is just the radiator. The fans are in a box way over there. Recently, I stepped up to a Kraken X63 for the desktop. This one was going on 4 years old, and I still hear the water in there a little bit, but there's not very much air, which is good. And JZ2 Cents has a really good video of how to install these, how not to install them, and how you can basically get the best performance out of them. This did a really good job for several years. I liked it. They're not hard to take care of. They're not hard to maintain. Basically, just install it and forget about it unless something goes wrong. With my 5900X and my Kraken X63, I've seen temperatures drop quite a bit. I think when I first installed it and I just ran it with the lowest settings on the Kraken to get as close to maybe what an air cooler one would be like, since I didn't want an air cooler, I was running temperatures idle at about 45 to 47. When I bumped up the Kraken to higher performance modes, not the quiet idles, but actual scaling it to the actual needs, the cool temperatures now are somewhere between the high 20s and low 30s, so it does a really good job of cooling things down. And soon I plan to do some overclocking with my 5900X. There are a lot of good offerings out there with closed loop water coolers, and you would have a lot of options with varying price points and good success rate depending on what CPU you're going to use and whether or not you're going to overclock it and how far you plan to overclock it. Next thing up, NVMe SSDs. They are getting cheaper, more affordable. They offer some serious improvements in load times for certain things. Not massive, but overall, I've been very happy. I started my rebuild with my desktop with SSDs that I already had that were still healthy and good to go. Then I transferred everything on to a new NVMe, and boots, loads, X-Plane 11 loads a lot faster. However, do keep in mind this. If you're gonna upgrade to an NVMe hard disk drive, or not hard disk drive, but SSD, you need to make sure, one, your motherboard or laptop will support it, and then two, what size it supports. There are 2 or 3 different sizes, I think 3 off the top of my head, and you need to look at the motherboard for your laptop or desktop and figure out from there. And then I recommend, if you have the cash to spend on it, do it. It might be a very worthwhile increase in overall load times. It's not going to give you higher frame rates, but it might make your quality of life with your desktop or laptop a little bit better. Motherboards. This one's a little tricky because there are a lot of choices out there right now with the new 11th gen chips from Intel, and the AMD 5000 series CPUs, are running on X570 and B550 boards. And you would think that the X570 boards are going to be massively better than B550, but here's the thing. A lot of the new B550 boards are a year to 2 years newer than the X570 boards, meaning the X570 boards came out in 2019. The new Ryzen 5000 series CPUs were still being brought to market at that point. They weren't even out yet. So if you buy a brand new motherboard for your 5600X, 5800X, or 5900X and up, you're going to have to probably flash the BIOS, the software on the motherboard, to make it work with these new AMD CPUs. I chose one that you could flash via thumb drive and then just plug in your CPU directly. If you don't have that, you could end up having to pay somebody to do it for you, or you might have to already have an older 3600X to at least plug into the motherboard, boot it up, update the BIOS, take that CPU out, and then put in your new AMD CPU. So keep that in mind when you're buying a motherboard. Try to find one that is able to be flashed without a CPU in it. Reasons to update to new motherboards will come down to things like USB-C, more USB 3.0 ports, new HDMI, display ports output, Thunderbolts being built onto some motherboards now, and then you have the budget boards that have PCI 4.0 support and budget boards that just have PCI 3.0. If you're looking for something to have long life, I would say go with something that has PCIe 4.0 and fits it within your budget, because there are a lot that are from the $180 range all the way up to $600 range that vary in performance, heat sinks, power delivery, and overall stability. That doesn't mean you can't find a $200 motherboard that will give you great performance and even some overclocking performance that's stable. But the cheaper you go, again, you get what you pay for. You may not get everything you want. So look at the overall functionality, look at the updates on the X570 boards, because there are some refreshed X570 boards out there. However, I'm sure it would be difficult to order those online and get exactly what you're hoping for. So keep that in mind when you're ordering online. And I know I've gone way over time, unfortunately. But the last thing I want to talk about are cases. If you're going to build a desktop from scratch, or you're starting over, me personally, I did my old case. It has USB 3.0 on it. It works pretty well. And the only thing I wanted more of was more openings for air movement. And 2, I wanted more USB-C ports on it. And that's going to be something that's going to come in my next upgrade, either next year or the year after next. I want a case with multiple USB-C ports on it. As more and more devices get that, as say, even with the Honeycomb Bravo throttle quadrant, the Honeycomb Alpha yoke system, those have USB-C plugging into the back. There's nothing wrong with using a USB-C to USB-C. I just like streamlining everything. And I think in time, USB-C is going to be a very good port integration for everything because it's smaller and hopefully it'll be cheaper in time. But don't just go for looks for your new case. Think about everything you're going to use it for. If you're going to be charging your phone, a lot of phones have gone to USB-C, and eventually iPhones will eventually go that way too, all of them, and the iPads as well. So think about what your future use is going to be for it. And would I say go all USB-C? No, please. I would try to keep a couple of legacy USB ports out on your rig, because you're going to have something old that you're going to want to plug in at some point. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I like to cover all my bases. But do try to make sure it still has some USB 3.0 backwards compatible ports, USB 3.1 and newer, USB-C, and then a couple other features that you think are going to be usable for you. Me, I chose an ATX full case because I wanted to put a lot of hard drives in there, because I do a lot of family stuff and I want to be able to store a lot of information, and even hot swap if I want to. I could build that into this desktop that I have. So think about all of your uses for your desktop before you make a case decision, and please make sure it has good airflow. Folks, this went probably 20 minutes over the time I really wanted to spend on this, but this was a discussion I wanted to have about PC parts and laptops to maybe help other people out there that are going through the same thing I've gone through for the last couple of years, to make a good decision when you're thinking about spending your money and your time on something to build from scratch, or build something or buy something that's already pre-built. Again, leave questions and comments below if there's any questions you have, or comments like this video stinks. And if you did like it, and even if you hate it, like and subscribe. Hey, you never know, I might actually produce something that you might like in the future. So Joe from NDB Aviation, thank you very much for your time. Stay safe, stay healthy out there. See you again real soon. Bye-bye.